paying them more for a skill set that I hope they never have to use. That's why they get more.
You know, one of my fears at the moment, which is perfectly linked to what you're saying, is I have a fear, and I've never expressed this openly, so this is the first time, so don't all come for me at once. I have a fear that Gen Z are the least resilient generation that I've ever seen. And a lot of it, and sounds so stupid and not evidence-based, but if you look at what TikTok is telling this generation work is, and there was a video that went viral on Twitter the other day out in Silicon Valley where it shows like a Facebook employee, one of the big tech companies. She arrives at work in the morning, she takes a photo of her latte, oh, there's free muffins. She goes over and has the free muffin. It shows her in her TikTok literally doing like 30 seconds of work. Then she's out doing some like pottery making class that work have put on. She comes back to the desk, does another 30 seconds of work. Then she's off to her work social. And I reflect on the storms that my father went through at work. And I just know so deeply inside of me that there's no way some of these younger Gen Z people could weather such a storm without quitting, doing a long LinkedIn post to criticize their employer, then quitting. And I just fear that Gen Z, when I'm hiring people that are in that generation, I almost need to go to an extra length just to check that they can cope with a high intensity culture where demands might come on a Saturday because the world doesn't stop on Saturdays and Sundays. So I wanted to get your take on that.
So let's examine both sides, right? Let's think of it. What's the balance and what are the costs, right? It is a generation that already was starting to ask these questions, but COVID forced the rest of us to ask these questions too, which is what is the definition of work, right? Like, what does a full-time job mean? And these are unanswered questions. So I don't have an answer as to what the future of work is because it's right now everything's in flux and things have not landed yet, right? So what is the definition of a full-time job? If I don't come to work, the definition used to be I come in at 8 or 9 and I leave at 5 or 6. That was a full-time job. Now, how much work I did between those hours, it was FaceTime. And we know that because we've all had jobs where we stuck around until 7. So we got FaceTime, so our boss liked us, right? We've all done it, right? But FaceTime is not a thing anymore. And so I have a full-time job and I'm offered another full-time job and I took it. And we see this like employees who have productivity issues and then they say that they're burnt out and I know how much work you have. You shouldn't be burnt out. Do they have a second job? And why shouldn't they have a second job? Well, we pay them benefits. So what? As long as they're getting their work done, do we care when? People all have side hustles. Even people who've got full-time come to work, everybody's got some sort of little side hustle. So the definition of what full-time employment is up for debate. And I think young people feel, in particular, that why shouldn't I? It's my time, I can do what I want with it. Or I only work 40 hours because those are my limits. Respect my boundaries, right? The problem is I think all of it is so literal, which is, yes, boundaries are important, but the edges of the boundaries are fuzzy, right? And it's not like I don't work on Saturdays. Well, I agree with you. I don't want you working on weekends. This one weekend, I really need your help to finish this project so we can get it out the door. I don't take meetings after 5 o'clock. I agree with you. I think we should have that life balance. But today, I just need you to work till 6 to get this one project done. And to recognize that, so one of the things they're getting right is that we're married to work and we take our phones on holiday. We take our computers on holiday with us and that work has ultimate say on our time. I agree. That should go the way of the dodo. But the extreme is not to put these hard lines everywhere and say, I don't do this. As an aside, the irony is, they demand that we respect their boundaries and yet they seem to step on every other boundary about bringing, emotional professionalism at work and dumping all of my problems onto my colleagues, which is emotionally unprofessional. It's that's a boundary you can't cross. But there is good evidence to your assertion that this young generation seems less capable to deal with stress than previous generations. That is true. They are good at curating, they've grown up in an Instagram, Facebook, TikTok world where I'm really good at showing you the life I want you to think that I lead. And so they're really good at presenting a confidence that they don't have. They sound like they have all the answers when they don't.
But then I see you presenting that life to me if you're a fellow Gen Z.
Yeah.
And I go, what? My life's stressful and difficult and I had to work really late, and you're having a frappuccino latte, whatever,
Yeah.
at 3 a.m. doing pottery lessons. I need to quit.
Yeah. It raises the question, what do you want from your life and what do you want from your work? Like, why do you have this job? You know? If it's just to pay the bills, I mean, I hope I know that is the case for a lot of people, that I have to have a job to pay the bills. And I hope that employers are good enough that even survival jobs are a nice place to work, you know? Trader Joe's, great company where people who have survival jobs, it's still a nice place to work, you know? But I think the question is what is the life that you're trying to build? And if you want a job simply to pay your bills, and you know this concept of quiet quitting, have you heard this one? Quiet quitting?
I've heard this term, but maybe I heard you talk about it.
Well, it's been written about.
Right.
It's not my concept. But quiet quitting is this thing where I don't quit the job, but I basically will dial back my effort and give you the minimum. So you pay me to do this job, and I will do the basic minimum amount to do the job, where you can't really fire me because I'm not really doing anything badly or wrong, but I'm also not going above and beyond at all, right? So there's this concept of quiet quitting where people are coming to work and they're just doing the minimum, doing their hours, doing their job, not volunteering or raising their hands or going, and that's it. And it raises the question, is that bad? You know? And I'm a great believer that it's all about expectation management, you know? Like I get asked about Amazon a lot. Like, do I disagree with how Amazon is run? And my answer is always the same, which is they never lied. They didn't tell you it's a magical place to work where it's all kumbaya and we all we all hang out with unicorns every day. It's really amazing. They're very open about it, that it's very, very aggressive and very rough and very competitive. And even the people who love it only last 2 years because they burn out. And so because they don't lie, you know what you're going to get if you go work there. And if you like that kind of culture, then go work there. If you don't like that kind of culture, then don't work there. But don't take the job and then say, I didn't know, because you did. Like Apple, people say, well, Steve Jobs used to drive his people really hard. But you ask the people who loved working there, they will tell you, yes, it was hard and there was a lot of pressure, but I did the best work of my life. And I'm glad I worked there because I never would have been able to work to that standard if I didn't work at Apple back in the day, right? So the important thing is that companies are honest about the kinds of cultures that they have, right? It's the lying. It's the, look how everything's kumbaya. And look, no culture is perfect. Even good ones have problems and even bad ones have advantages, right? But I think it's about managing expectations. And I think it's okay for somebody to say of themselves, look, I'm not a careerist. I am okay with the fact that I will never be an owner or a senior manager. I want to be paid fairly. I want to do decent work, but I want work to fit neatly in my life and not overwhelm it. And I'm going to look for a job where that is possible. And I don't think we're at the point where we have total honesty on both sides yet. I hope we can get to the point, because there's still stigma, because the older generations like you and me are looking at, if somebody were to say to us, I only want to work 40 hours, I'm willing to push my boundaries occasionally, but really this is just to, we would be like, well, you're not working here. So, so it hasn't normalized yet.
Yeah.
But I think it's just a question of being honest with oneself. And you're allowed to change your mind as well. Like, I've decided I do want to be a little harder driving, and I do have more ambition than I thought, or less. But I think it's just about honesty. And this point of view is as true in personal relationships as it is in our professional relationships. So I had a conversation with somebody recently that I found absolutely fascinating. And she is polyamorous. She has 4 boyfriends, right? And she is very open about it. And one of the things that she explains is you have to be very honest with everybody so that everybody knows what the deal is. I think what a lot of people do is they're dating somebody, it's new, it's casual, and they're dating somebody else that's new and casual, but they don't tell them about each other. So they both think that they're more special than they are, or they both are driving towards something that may or may not be true because, you're dating 2 or 3 people and you're going to wait and see which one works out. This, in the poly world, what I'm learning is you tell everybody everything so everybody knows. and it's very open and honest, and everybody knows where they stand. You can say, I'm not into this, I want to be the sole, or I'm okay with this, and maybe something will develop, maybe it won't. But the point is, it's on the table. And I admire the level of communication. What I'm hoping is that we do the same thing in our professional lives. So you sort of have poly work, if you will. You know, I have 2 full-time jobs. You know, I have 3 things going, or I only want this kind of relationship. And it works if both parties are really open and honest, because it's all about managing expectations. Hold on, I thought that you were going to give me all of your attention and all of your effort and all of your ambition, and you're telling me you only want to work, you want to treat my job as a casual job? Like, just replace relationship with job. All the same rules seem to apply. But if I knew that, I would be fine with that. I would have given you a different job and had different expectations and wouldn't have pushed you really hard. I would have given that work to someone else. Because I'm assuming you want to live your career like I live my career. Like I assume that I'm getting into this relationship and you're getting into it for the same reasons as me, because we never had a conversation. We are nowhere near that in terms of social acceptance for that kind of conversation. But I aspire for that somebody sits down and says, a part of your CV and part of your interview says, you know, what kind of work-life balance do you aspire for and how do you view work? Even if you change your mind. Then if expectations are managed, then what's the problem?
You've answered one of the actual number one questions I wanted to ask you about today, because when I read your book, The Infinite Game, one of the big things it changed in my life was, I remember I was on a plane, I read the book, started writing some stuff, came back to our office in the UK, and I did a big presentation to all my teams about how we create a sustainable company. Because if what if what you're talking about in the book is true, then and we're not playing a finite game here. How do we redesign the business from the ground up so that it is fundamentally sustainable?
Yep.
I came up with this thing called WWW, Work, Welfare, and World, which is the 3 reasons why we exist. We made 2020 goals, so this was in 2019, 20 goals before 2020 for each of these areas. And I'm thinking about it again a lot now, which is like, if I was to design my business in a way where my team members would stay working here forever, how would I go about that? You've just answered it by saying the point about honesty, expectations. So sitting them down and saying, what do you want from your life? Because I've never asked that.
Yeah.
As you quite rightly identified, I'm presuming they want what I want.
Exactly.
So I wrote it here as a question to ask you. How do I get my employees to stay forever?
Okay, so why should
Not like a dictator, that sounds awful.
But I understand that. But why should, it's you want to create a place in which if people want to stay, it'll be an enjoyable place that they can make a career and grow within the organization, right? Like, and for some people who don't have aspirations for leadership, that they can come and do good work every day and sort of get fair raises on a regular basis, so that they would, with cost of living adjustments, et cetera, that they want to stay there, even if it's a middle level. Like, not everybody aspires to like be a hard driving, owner, And I think it's about making it a conversation. We never treated work like a conversation, We treated it like a speech. This is how it's going to be. And I think so. One of the good things that's coming out of COVID and young people is they're asking questions about, why does work have to be that way? And employers are rebelling against it because it doesn't fit the way we grew up and doesn't fit our understanding of relationships, And it's just a conversation. That's all it is. And by being honest up front, then you can say, I don't think this is going to be a good fit for us. I don't think you'll enjoy working here. And so if I employ you, knowing what I know now, we will both get frustrated. And I will either ask you to leave, or you will just tell me you're going to leave. That's how this will end, because of misaligned expectations. And so I think being honest about what you want and who you are and what your ambitions are, even if they change in the middle, you can knock on the door and say, I've changed my mind. I think I want to stay here forever. I told you I didn't, but I really love it here. And I know this from the military. Some people join the military because it's a steady job in a bad economy, or because the military will pay for you to get a college education, and they didn't have the money to get it without it. So they join the military. And then when there, they fall in love with it. They never came in for service. They discovered the service and the brotherhood and the sisterhood and decided to stay, And some people might have come in for the service and realized this isn't for me. So work should be the same. But I think there needs to be honest conversation about, and like I said, I've had debates even with my partners, my work partners, when they say, well, if we're paying them a full salary and giving them benefits, they shouldn't have another job. And my question is, why not? As long as our work product doesn't suffer as a result. Like if they're phoning it in, missing all the meetings, then yes, absolutely, right? Like we're paying for a certain expectation of performance, but not necessarily of when they get it done. And so why shouldn't they have two jobs? But I think, again, there has to be honesty, which is we have an expectation that of X, and if somebody says, I don't want to meet that expectation because I want to have two jobs, then you can adjust for salary that way. You can be like, all right, then how about we pay you less and you can have all the freedom you want. And again, it's a conversation. We don't make these things conversations. We make them one-way. And by the way, that's from the employee to the employer too. I demand X. Somebody asked me recently, how do I want to ask my boss for a raise. How do I do it? And I said, the problem, the way most people ask for a raise is like, I want a 20% raise. I did my research and my job, the average salary on my job, is X.
My friend gets paid X.
My friend gets paid X. I know somebody who I work with.
Yeah.
I'm doing the same work as them, so I want to be compensated equally, and I want a 20% raise, right? And so they're positioning the question that leaves the employer no choice but to say yes or no, right? And even if it's, I can help you get that, but this is how it's going to be. Like you're going to have certain targets. It still comes across as a no, right? Because the request was binary, right? And so the advice that I gave to this person was stop thinking of your job as an event and think of your job as a career. Think of your job as a continuum, and go to your boss in the middle of this continuum. I've worked here for 2.5 years. I've been here through high times and low times. I'm loyal. And my aspiration is to stay here and grow with the organization. Can you help me figure out a path that gets me to this salary? It's not a yes or no now. Now it's like, absolutely I can. I can give it to you today.
Yeah.
No path necessary.
Nice.
Or, absolutely I can. We're going to set some target goals that I want you to hit. And if you can hit them, then you'll absolutely work to that salary. But again, it's allowing for conversation, and it's allowing somebody to recognize that you view your own career with the organization as a continuum, that I've been here and I want to continue to be here. So can you invest in me? Can you take a bet on me rather than meet my demands? And so I think a lot of these things fail because they're poorly presented.
Amen.
And this goes once again to, this younger generation who seem to lack the skills for coping with stress, not very good at asking for help, very confrontation avoidant. Like I said, so afraid sometimes to have the question, ask the boss, can I have a raise, that they would rather just quit. And it's often with an email that says, you don't appreciate me, you don't pay me enough. I was like, what? You just had to ask me, I would have given you a raise, And I think part of it is also that, when somebody is anxious about something, they do poorly present. They do make things binary because there's fear or anxiety or stress or fear of rejection. What if my boss says no, right? Can I handle that? Like all of these things that come into these very sort of binary aggressive things. And I always equate all of these challenges at work to personal relationships. Like you can't go to the person you love in your relationship and say, I demand this. It's just not going to go well, right? But you present a situation, you say, I want us to move through this, and how do we work through this together? And I think that's how these difficult work conversations need to happen. A work relationship is a relationship like any other relationship. There's trust, there's anger, there's care, there's good days and bad days, and all of the same nonsense, messiness in our personal relationships are at work as well. There's slightly different standards of professionalism and emotional professionalism and things like that. But in terms of, it's a relationship like any other relationship. So you have to treat it like a relationship. And in fact, go read relationship books if you want to fix things at work.
Quick one. We have a brand new sponsor on this podcast, which I'm very excited to tell you about. They're a brand called Blue Jeans by Verizon, and they are a video conferencing and collaboration tool that has changed the game for our team. So I'm so glad to be working with them because, as you know, one of the most important things for me is when we have a sponsor, it is part of my world. It is part of my life. It is part of my company's. As someone who's on calls pretty much 80% of the day building my businesses and speaking to my teams all over the world. It's the guaranteed security that differentiates Blue Jeans from all of the other options that are out there in terms of video conferencing. Their enterprise grade security means you can protect your organization from malicious attacks and establish real trust with everyone that joins your meeting. And that is something. There are so many things that make sense and make Blue Jeans a better option than the sort of competitors out there. And I'll be talking about all of those aspects, those features, and the reasons why I use Blue Jeans in the coming episodes. If you want to check it out, you can head to www.bluejeans.com to learn more. When I read about our history as sapiens or Homo sapiens or whatever, it appears that we weren't with one partner. Mm-hmm. We were with multiple partners. Mm-hmm. We now live in this society where we're
in ours,
told to be with one partner. Mm-hmm. Is that natural? Is it human? Does it work? The stats seem to suggest it's not really working so well.
I mean,
if I bought a TV and 50%, and they said, oh, by the way, there's a 50% of these are going to break, I wouldn't buy the TV.
Right.
I'd maybe, rent one.
Right. That's funny. Esther Perel, who's wonderful if you don't know her work, she talks about the changing definition of monogamy. Monogamous used to mean I'm in one relationship for my whole life. Now monogamy means I'm in one relationship at a time, right? So even that definition has changed, where monogamy and people who consider themselves strictly monogamous have 15 monogamous relationships, right? Over the course of 10, how many close? I've had 6 close, relationships. They were all monogamous, right? So these definitions are evolving anyway, right? That's number one. Number two, I like that we are having conversations about the health of relationships like we're having conversation about the health of work. And these things have always existed. The difference is now the stigma of talking about them seems to have dissipated. At least in the United States where I live, it's amazing how many people are talking about open marriages, open relationships, polyamorous relationships, consensual non-monogamy. I don't even know what all the differences of all these words are, if I'm honest. There's so many words that seem to mean similar things. I don't understand the nuances. But the point is it's amazing to me how many people are raising the question of what is a healthy relationship. And I think one of the things that boils down for me is, it goes right back to what we're talking about, which is it's based on both parties and they both get a say. And so if you say, I want to live this kind of lifestyle, and you're upfront about it, and somebody says, I'm cool with that, then great. But if you lie and say, I want to be strictly monogamous, but you don't really, because you like the person a lot, and you think that if you tell them that you want a different kind of relationship, you're going to lose them. The conversations we have are largely born out of fear. If I tell her what I really want, she won't like me, and then I won't get another date. That's true. That is a possibility. But if I tell her exactly who I am and what I want, and she likes me for who I am, then isn't that better? And I think it's the same thing that we're just talking about work. So I don't think it's right for us to say we should be strictly anything, because some people want one kind of relationship. Let's rephrase that. Both people in that relationship want that kind of relationship, and both people in the other kind of relationship both want that kind of relationship. Then we just have to respect that we have different points of view about what brings happiness. As long as you're happy and it's consensual, I think we're done. And usually the problems arise when somebody has, most of these problems are born out of fear of loss, right? Insecurity in a relationship, jealousy, for example. This is the other thing. That friend I was telling you about, who's super open and honest about her life. I was talking to her the other day, and she says, I'm jealous. She says, I'm having jealousy, and I'm trying to figure out where it's coming from. And what I found so fascinating about it is she treated jealousy as a feeling, like happy, sad, angry, where in most monogamous traditional relationships, jealousy is usually an accusation, right? I saw you look at the barista that way, right? And jealousy is born usually out of fear. And hyperprotective, possessive, is born out of fear of loss, right? And what I found so fascinating was she didn't blame her partner for her feeling of jealousy. She wanted to understand where her feeling of jealousy was coming from. It was a feeling, right? And not an accusation. And so I think the same is, all of this, whether we're talking about work or personal relationships, everything we're talking about today comes right back to those human skills that we are lacking. And I hate the term soft skills. Hard skills and soft skills we talk about, right? Hard and soft are opposites, right? They're hard skills and human skills. These are the hard skills you need to learn to do your job, and these are the human skills you need to learn to be a better human being. We're really good at teaching hard skills. We're junk at teaching human skills. And human skills include things like how to listen, how to have a difficult conversation, how to give and receive feedback, how to have an effective confrontation. These are skills that most people lack. We saw it after the murder of George Floyd. The number of leaders who, after George Floyd was killed, did nothing. They said nothing to their teams, not because they're bad people. It's because they weren't taught how to have a difficult conversation. And so they were so afraid, there's that fear again, of saying something wrong that they would accidentally offend someone or inflame the situation that they chose nothing. And I think the same goes in our relationships. We make too many decisions out of fear, right? Now, as entrepreneurs, we understand risk, right? We understand risk, right? And that big reward comes with big risk. Small reward comes with small risk. No risk, you're leaving it up to somebody else. And to get over the fact that if I tell somebody who I really am, that they may not like me, well, don't you want to find that out sooner rather than later? Because they're gonna find out. The truth is always revealed. Sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. The truth is always revealed eventually. But think about the magic of being able to say the kind of job you want to have and the kind of life you want to live and the kind of relationship you want to have at the risk that they may not hire you or they may not go on a second or third date with you. But think about the opportunity if you do take that risk.
I'm thinking about all the people listening to this right now who are in a relationship. They've been there for 15 years. It's become loveless. Maybe they're not having sex anymore.
Yeah.
And they're driving on the motorway now listening to us speak and they're thinking, I really want to have sex with someone else. And if I go home and tell Jane or John, whoever it is, I don't want to be gender specific, that I just want to have sex with someone else and I also want to keep them around, they're going to leave. So I can't be honest,
Correct.
Simon.
Right. So once again, it goes like asking for a raise, right? If you make it binary, you're backing someone into a corner. I realize our marriage is loveless, so I want to start seeing other people. And you can too. You know?
Yeah.
And what you're doing is you're forcing someone into a binary yes or no, which is unfair to somebody. And you're setting yourself up for probably failure, right? As opposed to saying, I love you, you're my life partner, you're my best friend. I never, ever want to lose you. At the same time, our relationship is loveless and I'm struggling because I crave love and I crave that kind of affection and we don't have it. And so I'm struggling and don't know what to do. And I want to know how you feel and I want to know if we can work on this together. So you're making it, it's just like the raise. It's like, let's make this. Now, if you hate the marriage, then get out of the marriage. You know, like if you've tried the counseling and it's broken, then that's a different conversation. But if there is the desire to stay in the loving relationship in some way, shape, or form, but you're looking to fill a place that's missing, then that's a conversation. But it is not a demand or a request. It's a difficult, honey, I need to have an uncomfortable, difficult conversation. And we may not get it resolved today, but I want us to promise to stick through each other. Stick through this with each other so we can figure it out together. It might take us a day, it might take us a week, it might take us 6 months, but I'm going to be here throughout and want to go through this with you because I am struggling in this relationship. Somebody else has the right to know that their partner is struggling in the relationship. And odds are if only one person is struggling, there's no scenario where only one person is struggling. It's like when we have a problem with an employee, like if we really can't, they hate their job too. Like it's not a shocker, you know? And like to start the conversation, like, listen, I'm struggling with you. I know you hate it here because it can't be one way, right? That doesn't exist.
I'm pretty sure most of the issues I've had in my life stem from the fact that I didn't have an honest conversation sooner.
Me too.
Yeah.
Of course, me too. And I made the mistake in my life that I didn't, and it was well intentioned. I didn't want to hurt their feelings. I didn't want to offend them or upset them. And so I dealt with the difficult thing in my head and tried to come up with the solution that I thought best looked after my needs and your needs, because but if I told you this, I would burden you with the stress of having to figure this out. So I'll figure it out and then I'll make the decision that I think is best for us. It failed every time. Because the mistake that I made is I treated the relationship as an individual when it's not, it's two people. And the problem with a relationship with two people is I'm not in total control of the relationship. Remember, I'm a member of a group, I'm a member of a tribe, I'm a member of a team. I'm not in total control of everything. And I have to relinquish some control. And the thing we have to deal with more than anything is fear. It's fear that is the underlying thing why we don't have honest conversations. It's why we are hyper-aggressive or make things binary. It's because we fear rejection, we fear loss, we fear whatever it is. And and we can ask for somebody to reassure us. And we can deal with the fear first. And by saying, I'm going to stay here, and an employer or a lover can say, I promise you I will stick through this with you as well. I will not abandon you. We'll get through this together. That takes the fear down a notch, right? That we will do this together. And in my own relationships, COVID, all the bad that came with COVID, again, you know how I see the world. I see the world as balanced. There's good and bad in everything, right? All of the struggle and bad that happened in COVID, there was tremendous good also. And in my own life, I had the opportunity, like many of us, to stop, get off the hamster wheel, and then look backwards and saying, do I want to get back on the hamster wheel? Or look at all my relationships. Like, why weren't they working? Like, where's my accountability in this? What was I doing wrong? And I realized that one of the things I had to do was I had to be a better listener. And so, my girlfriend, and when we first started dating, she's a terrible listener. Terrible, right? I mean, we joke about it. Where I would say, babe, I need to have an uncomfortable conversation with you. There's something I'm struggling with, something you said or did that it's making me uncomfortable. I need to work it through with you. And she would start telling me a problem she had with me, right? And so what I would do is just hold space for that, and the conversation would just change entirely, But I had to learn, what I learned about listening is it's holding space. To learn to hold space for someone, to learn to as if holding a baby, like to let someone feel safe telling you what they need to say without you trying to fix something or disagree with something or correct something, right? Go on, tell me more, what else? Was the most valuable thing I learned in COVID. And the nice thing is when you give that to someone, weirdly, by some weird osmosis, they gain the capability to give it back to you. Because you've done it, if you do it enough times, you can say, and this is what came later, which is, I hear what you're saying and I want to talk about that. But for now, I want to finish the thing that I started talking about. Can we just start with that? And you can say it politely. And they recognize that you've held space for them so many times that they'll offer you that service, and they know how to do it because they've seen it modeled.
The really interesting thing about that, and I was thinking about my own relationships with my partner, is the reason why that's so true for me is because most of the time when someone is talking and repeating themselves, is because they don't feel like they've been heard.
Correct.
So in my relationship with my partner, the fact that we do exactly what you've described, where we literally go, give me a safe space, and then I talk, means she only feels like she has to say it once because she feels like it was heard the first time.
Right.
In my previous relationship, I remember I'm going to be honest, I was in the wardrobe one day and I've locked myself in there. My girlfriend is banging on the door, repeating herself. And I'm not proud of this, but it's the truth. Long context, I said, I'm going for New Year's Eve, me and a client are going out to Singapore. It's their birthday. It's the biggest client in the world. They've asked me to come. It's their birthday. She goes, I want to spend New Year's Eve with you. And I go, yeah, but I've told them that I'm going to Singapore. She goes, I want to spend New Year's Eve with you.
Yeah.
And that just went on and on. And at one point she's like screaming at me. So I just like go and hide in the wardrobe.
Yeah.
She spends all night banging on the bloody door, like repeating the same thing over and over. In my new relationship, we communicate with more context and we actually listen when the other person's speaking. So it only needs to be said once.
Yeah.
And then she can speak and then I listen and I repeat it back to her and then I speak.
So one of the things that same, right? So
This was 10 years ago, by the way. I'm not trapping myself in wardrobes anymore.
The thing that I learned about being in a relationship, I used to come home and do the same thing. Like, hey babe, I got a thing on Friday with a client, right? Or I'll give you an even simpler one. The Joneses invited us over for dinner on Friday. I know that you're free on Friday, so I said yes. So we'll go for dinner at the Joneses on Friday, and hell ensues, And I was like, but I know we have no plans, And so now what I've learned is when the Joneses call me up and say, you want to come for dinner on Friday? I go, my God, I'd love to. Let me check. And I come home and say, hey, the Joneses invited us out for dinner on Friday, but I want to check with you first. Oh my God, I'd love to. Great, I'll call them and confirm. And I've made again, instead of me well-intentioned making all the decisions, even though I know exactly what it'll be. I know the answer is going to be yes. What I'm doing is including the other person in the relationship. That's all it is. It's making someone feel seen and heard and included. And like I said, there's so many great lessons we can learn from our personal relationships, which we can apply at work. Because again, an easy way to understand how I approach all these things, I view it all as just human beings interacting with human beings. That's all it is. And all the anxieties and fears and egos and all, it applies everywhere.
What's the most difficult conversation you've had to have with someone when we're talking about that honesty and communicating as authentically and openly as we can as soon as possible? What are those difficult conversations you've had to have, or a conversation you had maybe too late down the line and you thought, I wish I'd had this conversation sooner?
I mean, they're not different from anybody else. I mean, as talking about George Floyd to my team, talking to George Floyd with my black friends, that was really hard. And I made mistakes. Like I remember with one of my black friends, I was crying, as we were talking about it. And I said to him, why aren't you crying? And he said, because it's new for you. It's not new for me. He says, I'm exhausted. I'm like, I'm glad you're having your experience, but it's not my experience. You're seeing this for the first time. I've seen this my whole life. Like that was hard. To have that being told at me, to me. It's true too. But my conversations are the same the difficult conversations, it's about honesty in relationships, about honesty with somebody on a team. If something's not working out, or if you have to give somebody really hard feedback, somebody who you are really close with, it doesn't mean you're letting them go, but like there's really hard feedback you need to give to someone, and learning to deliver it with love, learning to be matter of fact. One of the mistakes I would always make, all these theories about give somebody the compliment sandwich, tell them something good, tell them the thing you want to tell them, tell something good. It doesn't work because it's bullshit generic something good, really specific something bad, and bullshit generic something good. 7 good things, 1 bad thing. Bullshit, generic, really specific. So it doesn't work in my opinion.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. Like if it's really, it's like, I really like that you show up to work with a smile. And there's one other thing I need to talk to you about, But what I've learned is when delivering good news, be very emotional. And when delivering bad news, remove the emotion. And so like bad news at work especially, when we sit down with someone like, so I don't want to belabor this. You've been with us for a long time. This is really hard. I need to give you some difficult feedback. I'm infusing all of the emotion into this, right? But to be dispassionate about it, say, hey, I need to give you some difficult news. I need to just have a really blunt conversation with you about something that's going on at work, and it's going to be really hard for you to hear, but I need to tell you. Boom, here it is. People appreciate it when we're just straight with them, and not infuse all the extra emotion. But yeah, I think the same is. Again, same is true in all relationships.
I've always found that I struggle to use the word employees, and you just went to use the word then and you changed it to team.
Yeah.
Is that something that you also, the reason why, so I use, whenever I'm on the podcast, I talk about it, but my team will never hear me, and if they might not have noticed this, but this has been the same for about 10 years. I will never in a chat call people that work in my company employees.
Yeah.
It seems to be somewhat of a violation of my values somehow. Yeah. And I just noticed you went to say the word, you went team, someone on my team. That's what you did.
Yeah, I mean, I do the same. I mean, I when I show up to a group call, I'm like, hey team, and like, yeah, then, Employee to me is a technical word, you know?
Yeah.
I don't mind talking about employees when we're talking about generic company stuff. I don't mind referring to employees when I'm talking to when I'm talking about insurance, you know, or benefits, you know, it's a technical term that I think is totally fine to use in technical times. But when I'm referring to people and those people have names and faces, then they're the team.
Do you know, this Andrew Tate thing, this Andrew Tate guy has been in a lot of the headlines. Do you know who he is? Probably a good thing you don't. He's been in, it's this guy that kind of came out with this kind of pro, you know, pseudo weird, kind of strange masculine approach. His base thesis, I guess, is saying that young men and men generally are missing something in their lives that the modern world hasn't given them. Jordan Peterson has alluded to similar things. Jordan Peterson's been on this podcast a few times. It's got me thinking about gender differences and our needs in the world. There's a lot of people in like YouTube and the self-help space that are saying men have these unmet needs because the world is becoming more equal and they are lacking their sense of purpose, and men are meant to be, I don't know, tribe leaders and all these kinds of things. And when you look at the suicide rates in our country, the single biggest killer of men under the age of 40 is themselves. It's suicide. And so I've been mulling this. Is there gender differences in your view? These are all very difficult topics, I understand, but are men in particular having certain needs go unmet because of a changing world, in your view?
Everybody has unmet needs because of a changing world. Fact. Are there gender differences? Of course there are gender differences. And how we respond to men versus how we respond to women is different. A friend of mine who was, three things happened to her simultaneously. She's in the military. Three things happened to her simultaneously. Any one of them would be difficult, but all three of them happened to her at the same time. She was promoted to senior management. She became lieutenant colonel. She was deployed for 13 months, 12 months, and she was given her very first command. Okay, so any one of those things is a trial, and all three happened at once, right? And she took over a job where the previous 5 leaders had all been fired. It was a poorly run group. She would be working with people from different forces. So she's in the Air Force. She'd have Air Force and Army reporting to her, some of whom were much older than her and much more experienced than her. And she is a hard-driving, you know, passionate young officer who said, I'm going to turn this group around and I'm going to prove to everybody that I can turn it around. I've been practicing leadership. I've been studying leadership. I want to be a great leader. And it was a failure. Like, they were ignoring her. They weren't taking her seriously. And no matter how she powered up, it didn't work. And every night she would cry herself to sleep and started regretting being in the military. All she wanted to do was go home. She didn't want to be stuck on deployment anymore. What was something really exciting now became a regret. And she didn't know what to do. She was failing, which was hard for her to deal with alone. I mean, as it was. And so she decided to give up. And she said, I will not turn this group around. So if I'm going to fail at my job, then and I'm stuck here for another 6 months, and so is everybody else, I'm going to change my mandate. Then instead of turning this group around, I'm just going to ensure that the rest of their time here, they really enjoy it. I'm just going to make it more fun for them to come to work every day because they're also away from their families and stuck. And then something strange really started to happen. They started to listen to her, take her seriously. They started to respect her more. And she ended up being very, very high performing at the end, and the group completely turned around. Because on her way in, she made it about herself, and she made it about the metrics, and she made it about the performance. The lesson she learned was, if you make it about the people, then the people will take care of everything else. And I remember I sat down with her a week or two after she got back, and she's telling me this whole story for the first time, you know, after she got back. And she started crying. And when she said to me, she goes, I have never felt a joy so deep as seeing someone discover that they are capable of more than they thought they were. Which is very different than, I'm going to turn this around. So in her telling me this, she said one of the big lessons she learned is there is such thing as female leadership. And she had a conversation with one of the army, one of the soldiers. And like, why didn't you listen to me? Like, why was it so difficult? Why did we struggle? And he said point blank, because when a male officer yells at me, right, I take it, I hear it, I move on, right? It's fine. When you yelled at me, I felt like my mother was yelling at me. And it was more difficult, you know? So there are gender differences in how we respond to each other, because it is a mom-dad thing, right? We respond differently. And men are sometimes, not always, but men are sometimes better at just being told blank by another guy, just do this. And you go, okay, well, I'll just do it. But when you create gender, it creates all kinds of other interpretations and associations, like our mothers. So I think we cannot discount those. And, you know, traditional male leadership qualities are things like decisiveness, aggression, you know, those kinds of things. Traditional female qualities are things like patience, you know, maternal instinct, empathy. And I think the mistake we've made across all leadership is we teach male leadership. We teach decisiveness and we teach aggression. And these are the things we teach. And we teach that to everybody. And the reality is what makes great leaders is they have a balance. And what we should be teaching is more of female leadership. And, you know, all leaders should take on the qualities of patience and empathy. You know, this is the irony. And so I think we do need to teach those skills. I mean, this goes back to what we were saying before. These are those human skills. You know, women get my work a lot quicker than men. When I was starting my career, you know, women would just nod and be like, yeah, what do you, of course. And men would be like, what are your case studies? And what case studies you have to prove your model?
Logic and...
You know? Men would fight with me on some of the details, and women just inherently, intuitively understood that the humanity of the work that I was preaching just made sense. And there's space for that. And so, yeah, I think female leadership and those qualities are just necessary everywhere. But yes, there are differences, and they cannot be discounted.
It's difficult to talk about them though, isn't it? It feels like a minefield. Even when I talk about gender differences, it feels like I'm going to step on a mine somewhere, because you're entirely correct. And my previous company was, our managing director was a woman, and I think the business was more successful because of those qualities you've suggested: empathy, care, patience. She was much more honest about forecasts, and how the business was going to perform, versus a male leader. I mean, this is such a narrow example, so it's not necessarily truth, but a male managing director we had who was extremely exaggerating and very, very, very ambitious about forecasts that were never realized.
That makes sense. That's consistent. And I think, you know, there's lots of data on this. You know, men, you know, when they apply for a job and they say we need these 10 things, and if they have 6 out of the 10, they apply for the job. And women won't apply for the job unless they have 9 or 10 of the qualities. You know, men are a little, you know, I've seen it happen in meetings where, you know, there's a male entrepreneur and like the client is saying, you know, we'd love to have this. And they kind of have it. And the guy goes, we can totally do that. And, you know, and they'll sell it right there and then figure it out later. And I've sat in meetings with a female entrepreneur who has almost that, like they're really close. And you know, somebody's saying we would love this. And I'm like, you have that? They're like, it's not, we haven't tested it yet. I'm like, you have it. Tell them you have it. They're like, well, it's not perfect yet. You know? So yeah, I mean, I mean, some of it is cultural as well. I have a female entrepreneur friend who has a theory. And I have to stress this is her theory.
Deferring responsibility.
Exactly right. She believes men make better entrepreneurs than women.
She believes men make better entrepreneurs than women. Okay.
Yes.
Why?
And the logic is that as when we're young, traditional roles, for the most part, still exist. That if you want to go to the prom, generally, the boy asks the girl. Right? It's. I think it's softening, but traditional roles are still there, which means from a young age, boys learn to muster up courage, take a risk, and get rejected, and then they have to do it again, and then they have to do it again, right? And so you flash forward to adulthood, and men who learn that skill
of asking,
of taking a risk. Facing rejection, being rejected, and then trying again makes them resilient entrepreneurs. Where for again, assuming traditional roles are played, you know, if a woman who hasn't learned the skill of risk rejection is more afraid of the risk as an adult. Now, we could argue that with online dating, swiping left and right, that everybody's losing the skill. We could argue that nobody has to take a risk because you just swipe right. You don't know that they swiped left on you. They think maybe they just didn't see you. So you only get it connected, but nobody ever gets rejected. So are we building, that goes back to the original conversation of a young generation that's less capable of dealing with stress than older generations. Like there are fewer opportunities to risk, reject, have to try again, right? And the things that we learn as kids, these social interactions, they do become skills as adults. And so, is it a softening of a generation? Should not we be asking both, boys and girls? Shouldn't we not be asking them to both have to learn to take risk, as opposed to taking the risk away from everybody? I don't know.
No, do you know what? What I will say is I've had two very successful women entrepreneurs on this podcast who have said the same sentence, which is, as women in the workplace, we typically don't ask for raises as much as our male counterparts. And that kind of supports what you're saying there, which is men have at some point learned to just ask for the things that they want, whether it's a raise, whether it's
a job,
whatever it is,
But I think the theory here that my friend posed is that does it come from our experiences of dating when we're younger, that we build these skill sets that benefit us later in life as entrepreneurs. It's not risk reward, it's risk rejection.
Whenever I speak to someone that does a lot of interviews and conversations and talks, online a lot, I always try and think of questions that I would ask them that they've never been asked before. And one day I remember, it was actually after you left when we were in the studio in LA, I thought to myself, if I was going to interview myself, it would probably be the most interesting interview in the world, because I know all of the bullshit. And I know all of the stuff that no one's ever asked me, that I've maybe skirted away from or whatever. If you were sat in my chair and you were interviewing Simon today, what are some of the questions you would have asked you to get the most interesting stuff out of you? Maybe just give me one question.
Well, I think you've done a pretty good job. I mean, I think the best interviews are conversations. I think the best interviews have no agenda, but the interviewer has genuine curiosity. I think the best interviews are open-ended questions that are difficult. And in this case of your interviews, you are pretty blunt with a question that doesn't leave a lot of wiggle room. A lot of questions I can wiggle out of, and yours less so. But they give an opportunity to me to think out loud. I think a lot of the questions you asked today, I haven't thought about, or if I haven't sort of codified it. And what you heard were not answers, but you heard me thinking. And if you go back and listen to them, they're probably sort of bounce around a little bit, because you hear me trying to get to an answer. They're not answers. I'm trying to get to an answer. And those for me are the best, because I walk away feeling enlightened because I got to think, where usually the questions are, I've heard them all before. They're very focused on my work. When you wrote this, when you wrote that, what were you thinking? And I don't learn anything. So when you ask me about my work, I know the answers. When you ask me not about my work, you ask me about life, and you ask me about challenges that the world is facing. That's what I love. So, I think you've done that. And so the questions that I ask myself are the questions you ask me.
Okay, I'm going to ask you the question.
And I'm not cupping out. It's
fine.
Genuinely, you're very good at what you do.
I will ask you the question that I would ask myself.
Okay.
Which is, what is the greatest, I was just thinking about it then, what is the greatest fear you have about how you're currently living your life?
What is the greatest fear I have about how I'm currently living my life? That I'm not 100% honest with myself. Because if I'm not honest with myself, I won't be honest to others. And when somebody asks me a question that I'm afraid of the answer, not because I'm afraid of offending them, but I'm afraid of how I feel about the answer myself. I think that would be it. You know?
Have you got a suspicion that you're not being completely honest with yourself?
I think that all of us have a capacity to rationalize. It's one of the genius things about being a human being. We can rationalize anything. You know, I can make any decision the right decision, you know, and I can convince somebody of it as well, you know, like this is definitely the right decision. And I think it's that gut, that deep down inside to be truly honest, even if the answer is I don't know, or I'm scared, or I'm uncertain, or I want this and I feel like I shouldn't want it.
Do you have a suspicion that you're not being honest with yourself in a certain area of your life?
Do I have a suspicion that I'm not being honest
'Cause
with
I do.
myself? I don't think it's a suspicion. I think it's confirmed. I don't think I suspect it. I like every human being have elements of self-doubt and insecurity, of course, you know, and can convince myself of anything.
You have self-doubt in certain areas of your life?
Of course.
Where?
That's none of your business.
But that's a good enough answer.
Yeah. Those are my that's like not I'm pretty open, but there are things that I want to resolve myself. I want to resolve with myself before I'm able to share them, because if I share them, it has to benefit others.
Yeah, and you have to have done, I guess, work on...
I have to do work and I'm happy to share stuff that's in my life if I believe that conversation, even if it's unresolved, has a benefit to others. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't.
I find it really interesting is, you know, as I do this podcast, where my line is, what won't I share? And there is things I won't share.
Yeah.
It feels like maybe I'm bullshitting myself. Maybe there's quite a lot of stuff I don't share, or I twist it to make myself look better. People like to be a hero, you know?
Well, I mean, or like, I think we live in a world that we have confused vulnerability with broadcasting our feelings, right? And going on a podcast, or worse, sitting in your bedroom with your phone on self-view and broadcasting your breakup or your anger or whatever it is on TikTok or whatever your medium of choice is, you know, is not vulnerability, even if you're crying. Have that